we did not see that Republican establishment say, hold on, time out, that's not acceptable, that's not who we are, but rather be cowed into accepting it, and then finally culminating in January 6th, where what originally was, oh, don't worry, this isn't going anywhere, we're just letting Trump and others vent, and then suddenly you now have large portions of an elected Congress going along with the falsehood that there were problems with the election.
Hi again, everyone. It's 5 o'clock in the East. The GOP's descent into lies and madness led us to the deadly insurrection on January 6th. And as the president was speaking about there, that party's capitulation has seemed to flourish since then. Yet outside of Washington, brand new reporting in today's New York Times reveals a very different response. Republicans there looking at attacks on our democracy through a wholly different lens, focusing on holding those responsible to account. How novel. From that new report, we learned of another riot that took place shortly before January 6th at Oregon State Capitol in Salem. It was part of a wave of protests all across the country, triggered by the ex-president's lies about fraud. The siege on Oregon's Capitol is described like this in today's Times, quote, in December, a restive crowd have breached the exterior doors and battled law enforcement officers in a building that is capped by a gold leaf pioneer wielding an axe. The agitators, waving Trump flags and clad in body armor, wielded pepper spray and smashed windows. Arrest Kate Brown, the crowd chanted, referring to the state's Democratic governor. Sound familiar yet? But striking is how that state's GOP lawmakers are now handling the event. The New York Times continues, quote, on Monday, the state's House Republican caucus signed a letter encouraging the resignation of a colleague, Representative Mike Neerman, who in a newly discovered video appeared to be coaching protesters on how they might gain access to the building. The House Republican leader, Christine Drazen, said on Tuesday that she believed there was enough support in her caucus to expel Mr. Neerman from the state legislature if he did not resign. Republicans in Oregon, you see, not shying away from putting state and country over party. It is a stark contrast from the downplaying of January 6th and the obstruction to a commission we still see among the GOP on Capitol Hill. January 6th is the day that Republicans must reckon with, though, writes former Congresswoman Barbara Comstock in a new op-ed about how her party must right now stop fearing Donald Trump. Quote, Republicans, instead of opposing a commission to investigate the events of January 6th, need to be at the forefront of seeking answers on the insurrection and diminishing the power of QAnon and the other conspiracy theories Trump fueled. Republicans need to have more faith in their policies and stop being afraid of a dangerous and diminished man who has divided the country and now divides our party. Reconsider the commission, let the investigation go ahead, and run and win in 2022 on the truth. The truth. A feature obviously lacking in the former guy's baseless claim that he will be reinstated as president in August. His new polling shows a majority of Americans see right through his dangerous delusion. A Politico Morning Consult poll survey finds the ex-president's claim is dismissed by a majority of Americans, including 61% of Republicans. And the Trumpian wing of the Republican Party was dealt a blow last night in New Jersey when the moderate candidate, who back in 2015 called Trump a charlatan, defeated the former president's loyalists in the GOP primary for governor. New York Times reports it this way, quote, the Republican primary was seen as a test of the potency of Trump's combative brand of politics among New Jersey's party faithful. And the public discourse often touched on themes from the former president's divisive term, the politics of mask wearing and the legitimacy of President Biden's win. New signs the Republican Party may want to turn the page from Donald Trump is where we start this hour with some of our favorite reporters and friends. We're joined by two Republicans who represented the state of Virginia in Congress, the aforementioned Barbara Comstock and Denver Riggleman. Also joining us, Washington Post senior Washington correspondent and MSNBC political analyst Phil Rucker. Barbara Comstock, in Oregon, Republicans did exactly what you have been advising Washington Republicans to do. They took the violence seriously. They took the attack on their state capitol seriously. And they're purging from their caucus not Liz Cheney. They're purging someone who aided the insurrectionists. You have the absolute mirror image out of Kevin McCarthy as Republican leader in the House. How do you pierce through what now seems so locked in and rigid as fealty to the big lie?
Well, in Oregon, you had those videos and you had evidence. So I think the Democrats just need to start putting whatever committee they have that can issue subpoenas. The committee that I used to be chief counsel on, the Government Reform Committee, can send out subpoenas just about on anything. So that committee or others that have subpoena authority should be sending subpoena requests to people like Mark Meadows, Trump Jr., Ivanka, all those people who were in the tent on January 6th, all the people who were planning those meetings at the White House on what they were going to do on January 6th. Why was Roger Stone here in town? What was he doing? You can get text, phone records, all the documents, hotel records, and start putting that together. And that is going to tell a story, and that won't be partisan because it'll be factual, it'll be their own text. And we know just from the day, January 6th, remember when Chris Christie went on ABC News because he couldn't reach the White House or get anyone to say, Mr. President, you got to do something here. You got to call off the dogs. We know Kevin McCarthy called too, but there must have been dozens of others. And what was the response from the White House when they got those? I think it'll be fascinating to get it, as well as the planning of those meetings. So Democrats need to do this yesterday. I do not understand why I would have been subpoenaing those records January 7th, and then you'd be able to move the way Oregon did.
Deborah, the Democrats' position has been that the domestic violent extremism threat comes from millions of Americans who don't believe in the legitimacy of President Biden. And my understanding of the Speaker's position has been to do everything possible to have a bipartisan commission like the one negotiated by Kevin McCarthy's deputy, Congressman Gatko, so that it would bestow upon it legitimacy. That is not going to happen. To Barbara's point about the evidence that needs to begin being collected, let me read about what she says about following the money, because these are unanswered questions that these are answerable. These are not like known unknowns. Barbara writes, who planned and funded the Trump rally that day? And who picked the speakers and got attendees there? How did supporters of QAnon, Oath Keepers, and the Proud Boys get there? What happened as the White House planned for January 6th? There are emails. There were emails sent to supporters. There were venues booked. There were permits taken out. All that evidence has to exist. What do you think about where we are in terms of not turning over many stones?
Well, I think it's sort of ridiculous that we can't have a commission right now. And I just want to, give a shout out to Barbara. She's the OG when it comes to anti-Trump and going against ridiculousness. And Barbara and I have talked about this. She was in the Government Reform Committee. She knows this process. And we talked about her unleashing those subpoenas. And with my background in call chaining, social network analysis, and pattern of life, actually utilizing that data, those CDRs or call detail records and other forms of communication to identify what this social network looked like, who was working with who, what the communication paths were, right, and who the leaders were for each one of the movements, for each one of the cells that were there. I think this is a fact-based or data-based thing that we need to do. And I do believe that there's going to be committees with jurisdiction that are going to start to step up. I've been talking to a few of them myself. I can't talk about it too much right now, but I believe the committees do need to step up. They need to identify these individuals. And I want to say something about Barbara and what she wrote also. Here in Virginia, we didn't see what we saw in New Jersey. Virginia yesterday had the elections here. I don't know if you were aware of the off-year elections that were going on in Virginia yesterday, but most of the individuals in the Republican Party that won were pro-Trump or Stop the Steal. Barbara and I commiserated over that also. So, and also when you look at the New Jersey race, that individual did go to a Stop the Steal rally or meeting also. So I think those are some of the issues we have to address, is that this is baked in. Some of this is baked in, and what Barbara's referring to in her op-ed, or what she's talking about, is Barbara going on the offensive, because we have to tell people that you don't have to be afraid of President Trump. Conservative values don't have to equal crazy. That's why I appreciate Barbara for the years she's been doing this, but her op-ed really was an offensive move here in Virginia to ensure that we can actually get in front of some of this.
Deborah, will you help Democrats? Would you offer your time? Would you volunteer to help them where your expertise lies?
Helping Democrats right now is helping the country. This isn't a partisan issue. That's what I get so angry about, is that we had individuals that sieged the Capitol based completely on fantasy. And I apologize if the connection is not that great. We have awful storms coming through here right now. So if you hear thunder, it's not me, Nicole, okay? So, but I think right now we all have to help. And This is not partisan at all. Barbara's so right on this. This is about facts and data, about going after the individuals that are responsible for this. So I don't see it as Democrats reaching out to me. I see it as Americans reaching out to me for help in identifying who these people are. And I hope I can use my 20 years of experience and maybe rely on some of Barbara's experience to get through this.
Barbara, would you volunteer your time to help a committee investigation?
Well, listen, it's pretty easy to send those subpoenas. I mean, the records are there. Actually, we modeled our record, the subpoena request we did on Congressman John Dingell, Debbie Dingell's late husband. So it's pretty easy to do this. And I think one of the things that certainly I was stressing in my op-ed too is our Capitol Police and the DC Police who were fighting there that day and holding the line were doing so while these members all got to safety. And one of the things that when we met with the senators and explained to them what was really going on the front lines, we said, you know, they did their job so well that some of these members still don't appreciate how violent it was. You know, when you watch that 6-minute video of Officer Fanone getting brutally beaten so that he had a heart attack, that he was tased with, you know, by a Trump supporter. People don't want to hear those things. So there's so many facts like that that just need to get out there. The press needs to get the facts out, but we need to hear from more of these people on the front lines. So I think they just need to start doing this, start sending the subpoenas, start getting the testimony, and getting people up there in front of a committee. I certainly would prefer a bipartisan commission or some kind of even, you know, thing that, you know, where people to work together. And I think those 35 House members that voted for a commission are a good place to start on getting people who are there right now who would work together. But I think there's certainly a lot of, this isn't partisan. The American people need to understand the threat and the danger of QAnon and these conspiracy theories that actually just aren't, I pointed out, it's not just Republicans who believe these, it's independents and even some Democrats who buy into this, and it's creating this danger where we could have violence again.
And Phil Rucker, I mean, to Barbara's point, the family members of Officer Sicknick, who died after the insurrection, have gone into Republican senators' offices and told them the truth, and they still come out against this bipartisan commission to investigate. Let me show you something that happened on my colleague Hallie Jackson's program earlier today from Sandra Garza, the partner of Officer Sicknick.
I don't think any of them really knew the severity of the threat that day. But Donald Trump did, and the people in his administration, I believe, did. And that's why these Republicans don't want it. Some of the Republicans, I don't want to say all, because clearly, you know, for me, this is about the person. This isn't about the party. This is about the person. But they knew, and that's why they don't want this full commission, because it's going to expose a lot of ugliness, and they want to sweep that under the rug. And I'm not going to allow them to do that. I'm going to expose them for what they are.
Well, don't doubt her commitment, and I don't doubt her ability to do what she just said she is going to do, expose them. I mean, as Barbara, I think, details, and having worked with evidence and records, it is all knowable. It is knowable who paid for the space. It is knowable where the money flowed between the Trump campaign and the people who carried out the insurrection. These things can all be, it is knowable how many times Kevin McCarthy was on the phone with Donald Trump. It is knowable whether or not any House Republicans gave reconnaissance tours, as a Democratic Congresswoman has posited. Do you think we will ever find out all these knowable facts about this unprecedented attack on the U.S. Capitol?
You know, Nicole, I think the country should hope that we will find answers to those questions, because they're really important questions. The country, as January 6th showed, our democracy is incredibly fragile, and it was teetering on the edge, and it is still teetering there, because these conspiracies are still continuing to be spread through millions of Americans. There's the very real threat of continued violence in a future event of this nature, and not asking those questions, not going into the records, not finding the truth, makes it so much more dangerous here. The way to fortify this country's democracy is through truth and through fact, and figuring out exactly how this happened and how we as a society can prevent it from happening in the future. And it's such an important discussion we're having here, and frankly, a little surprising that more members of Congress don't see the pursuit of evidence and the pursuit of real, cold, hard truth to be worthwhile.
Barbara Comstock, why are there only two? Why is it just Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger who see this the way you see this?
Well, I think, like I said, 35 of the House members wanted to have an investigation. 7 senators supported it. So I do want to give more credit to all of those folks. But here's the thing. The information is going to come out. As I pointed out, when I worked on the Clinton investigations, we got a lot of stonewalling. We got hundreds, people who took the Fifth or fled the country. But you know what? The truth came out. Now, it dragged out, and it ran into the 2000 election, you may remember, that we worked on, and that George Bush won. I don't think it helped Al Gore that all of these things were dripping out all through an election year. So I think as a Republican, it would be better for Republicans to engage in this truth-telling process, be out there in front, rip the Band-Aid off fast and get the information out, because it's going to come out through books, through media, through documents, as time goes on. And the longer you drag it out, the more it's going to run into the 22 election cycle, the 24. But more importantly for the American people, it keeps that danger alive. I want to differ one thing with Phil is I don't think our democracy is fragile. I think it's very strong. I think we had, in those 61 cases, we had judges a lot of conservative judges who just kicked Trump out of court and kicked him to the curb and said his arguments were ridiculous. You saw people in Georgia stand up, Republicans in Georgia and Arizona. And, Bill Barr and the Deputy Attorney General, those records are coming out that they said no to all of this and said there's no fraud here. So you had a lot of people in a lot of different places. And I think the more subpoenas that we have out there for information, the more you're going to find that a lot of people said no to Donald Trump and stood up and protected this country. And we need to know that, too, because there probably are some unsung heroes, whether they're in the military or at Homeland, people who maybe are career officials who aren't going to go out there in front of the cameras. But we need to know the stress they were put under, and we need to get that story out. But if Republicans don't do it now, it's going to hurt them in a political way, as well as, making this danger go on longer than it should.
I mean, Barbara, I guess just the counter-argument to that is that it isn't over. I mean, Raffensperger may have done heroic things in the context of the count of 2020, but he also facilitated a voter suppression law in that state that would have disempowered him and his office. So I think it's not black and white. I think the observation that our democracy is imperiled is beyond dispute. You talked about the truth coming out. The Republicans aren't even for the truth. They purged Liz Cheney for telling the truth from their leadership ranks. I mean, are you really convinced that they're interested in the truth?
Well, listen, I know it's going to take a while. I pointed out Margaret Chase Smith. She came out in 1950. She only had 6 supporters on her Declaration of Conscience going after Joe McCarthy. But 4 years later, there were 67 members of the Senate who voted to censure Joe McCarthy, and then, he was over. Now, I'd like to shorten that timeline. 4 years was longer than it should have been. But I do think in the long run, the American people, the truth comes out, and I think our democracy usually rewards that. So I think a few people with courage, we already have them in the House and the Senate, people who've stood up. Margaret Chase Smith only had 6. We at least have 7 in the Senate now. We have 35 in the House. And I think those few people with courage can make a majority of people, particularly as you see, Republicans are now very concerned that Trump's out there endorsing very weak candidates who could lose them seats. Now, I'd prefer to have better candidates, probably that aren't Trump endorsed, that win. But if they lose, that's going to be another way that they learn their lessons. But I do think, sooner rather than later, with the truth coming out, the scales will fall from the eyes the way they did with Joe McCarthy. And this will be, either it's cutting out the cancer or maybe, more optimistically, it's just passing of the political kidney stone that is painful, but we can all survive it. But I do think our democracy was built to last. It's lasted through tougher things than Donald Trump, who's a 2 times impeached, failed guy who couldn't, at 47%, and it's going down every day, is not going to be the future of anything, that will ever get to the White House. Now, if we nominate him, yeah, that's not good because then we lose. But he's not going to be the future of anything. Except
I appreciate the optimism.
Sore loser. I mean, he's the future of, sore losers everywhere can rally around Donald Trump, but sore losers are still losers.
I appreciate your optimism. He is a loser and his stock is plummeting, but somehow Kevin McCarthy and Mitch McConnell continue to shill for him. Go figure. Barbara Comstock, Phil Rucker, thank you both for starting us off this hour. Denver Riggleman is sticking around for more.
They tried to disrupt our democracy. They failed. They failed. They failed to attempt to obstruct the Congress. This failed insurrection only underscores how crucial the task before us is for our republic.
Hits you like a ton of bricks, right? But you consider what happened in the days and weeks after he said all that. Made just hours after a violent mob stormed the Capitol. Of particular note there, Mitch McConnell's accurate use of this word insurrection. He wasn't the only one saying insurrection either. The Republican leader in the House, Kevin McCarthy, called it just that, an insurrection, in an interview with Fox News. But then, hours passed, days passed, time went by, Republicans kissed Trump's you-know-what, and everything changed. That Senate report on January 6th that we've been talking about, it only includes the word insurrection as part of quotes or citations. Then this, yesterday, from Leader McConnell.
Do you define the events of January 6th as an insurrection?
Look, I've said a lot about that already. I said it on January 6th. I said it again February 13th. I've covered that comprehensively, and I really don't think there's anything I can add.
And just a quick fact check, on February 13th, while McConnell was critical of Trump, he did not use the I word for insurrection. But more importantly, as our friend Aaron Blake points out in the Washington Post, McConnell's comments yesterday marked the culmination of a long and really intricate process of revisionism on the January 6th insurrection. Joining our conversation is Betsy Woodruff-Swan, national correspondent for Politico and an MSNBC contributor. Denver Riggleman is here as well. Betsy, I'm so glad Aaron Blake writes about this, and he's been on this since the beginning. I want to read you something he wrote back in February. I wrote a piece headlined in part, quote, "The emerging hoaxification of the Capitol riot. I argued that we were again seeing what we saw with Charlottesville, small but influential elements of the conservative movement over time, capitalizing on fading memories to recast the official narrative. That narrative, a more politically convenient one in which President Trump was actually somehow maybe right when he blamed both sides for what happened that day, despite all the evidence to the contrary. By the time I wrote that piece, it was beginning to happen with the January 6th Capitol riot. And two events Tuesday reinforced just how much that revisionism is prevailing in GOP ranks in subtle but highly pertinent ways." Barbara Comstock was just on talking about all the evidence that exists, urging Democrats to get to the business of issuing subpoenas and bringing all that evidence to bear, saying the truth will come out. But is the Republican Party having truthful conversations about this in any forum, public or private?
It's hard to make the case that elected Republican leaders, that the top leaders of the Republican Party on Capitol Hill and within the party's campaign arms are seriously looking to try to make sure that there is a clear, detailed, unbiased, and fulsome record that gets made of the events that happened on January 6th. And part of the reason that Republicans will privately make the case that they aren't interested in participating in the type of commission that they voted against just a couple of weeks ago is because they say it would be politicized. But look, this is an issue that is ingrained in American politics. It has everything to do with the DNA of the way that this country's politics work. And if the argument is that the ramifications politically for Republicans could be bad, that's not an argument against trying to understand the truth. Quite to the contrary. The only argument that you could defend by saying politicization is a problem, you could only use that to argue that the truth should not come out. And that's why we're not seeing senior Republicans embracing efforts to tell the truth and to cast as much sunlight as possible to disinfect the true ugliness and horror of January 6th.
You know, Denver, someone asked me about political polarization, and I said it felt bad, but I would take it 7 days of the week over the post-fact era. Because in the post-fact era, you don't have an investigation that everyone agrees is urgently needed for our national security and homeland security, and then maybe spin it different ways. You don't even have the investigation. And to me, the reason I keep coming back to Mitch McConnell and Kevin McCarthy whipping up votes against a Republican-negotiated bipartisan commission is because of the campaign against the truth, the pushing against the facts. And where I do not share Barbara Comstock's optimism is that the truth will come out.
So, listen, Barbara and I are pretty close friends, and I actually have an issue with that type of optimism sometimes because we're looking at data. And if you look at Mitch McConnell and Kevin McCarthy, that's called message discipline. They're polling on these specific types of word choices and how they're actually going to present this to the base for 2022. I'm reading through the entire Senate report, and I have to tell you, it doesn't really go into the history of why or the analysis of the social media radicalization that's happening. So it's just a very interesting thing to me that as being former military and former intelligence, I want to do follow the money ops. I want to look at who was calling who, what the command and control infrastructure looked like, right? Because there is one, coded language and memes, right? Hashtags. Looking at encrypted image boards, looking at unclassified Twitter, because we can get Twitter all the way back to 2006, Nicole. This isn't rocket science, right? When you learn analysis, you can do it. So I guess I'm still sort of stunned that we don't want to have individuals that find out what happened here. And let me say why. If we had Republicans saying that they feared for their lives, wouldn't they want to know the truth and the facts of what happened? Listen, if I had death threats, which I did, many of us did, from QAnon or conspiratorial individuals, why wouldn't we want to know the truth of this? And why wouldn't we want to know how a conspiracy theory that was being used as a grift, a monetized conspiracy theory, turned into a weaponized conspiracy theory, and how we had an insurrection or a riot, whatever you want to define it as people attacking the Capitol building based on fantasy? Has that happened in the history of the United States? Where we had absolute radicalized mass heading in there for Stop the Steal and saying hanging the vice president. I would think that's fairly important to me, right? And again, just being somebody who took the oath to defend the Constitution, I would rather do that than defend a party. And that puts me on the outs right now. We are the radical few. Barbara and I are part of that. We are the facts-based pariahs, or the radical few that want to know the truth. So, Nicole, I wish I had a great answer for you. I wish I had this overflowing abundance of positivity and optimism and sunlight and lollipops, right? And really what I have right now, looking at the elections in Virginia, looking at the individuals that are winning, the Trump message is working. Stop the Steal is baked in, and some of these conspiracy theories are baked in, and it's going to be a long slog.
Betsy, why aren't Republicans afraid of the domestic violent extremist threat?
It's hard to understand, in part because in the recent report on domestic violent extremism that the FBI, DHS, and the intelligence community recently released, for the first time, they stated publicly that the shooting attack on Republican members of the baseball team a few years ago at a ball field in Alexandria, Virginia, was the result of domestic violent extremism. That was an effort to kill Republicans that, according to the intelligence community, domestic violent extremists engaged in. This is a problem that puts everyone in danger. The fact that Republicans don't want to talk about it, the only explanation that you can think of is a political calculation. When it comes to foreign violent extremism, Republicans are delighted to talk every day about why it means we need to increase the Pentagon's budget. But when they have to look in the face of people who support them, people who think Republicans are the good guys, but who also are violent and dangerous, they don't want to do it.
Truer words. Betsy Woodruff Swan and Denver Riggleman, thank you both so much for spending some time with us today. When we return, President Biden. Bombshell new reporting from ProPublica has caused outrage throughout the country after reporting that leaked IRS documents reveal that some of the wealthiest Americans, including Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, and Warren Buffett, pay little or even no federal income tax. in recent years. NBC News has not independently verified these documents, and ProPublica declined to disclose how it gained access to what it describes as a vast trove of Internal Revenue Service data on the tax returns of thousands of the nation's wealthiest people, covering more than 15 years. ProPublica does not allege that any of the people in their report did anything illegal, and the IRS is now investigating how those documents were leaked. But the report is reigniting a debate over taxing the wealthy. President Biden has suggested that the country's richest should pay their fair share to help fund his agenda. So far, Republicans have been unwilling to compromise even on that. With the ProPublica report exposing the inequities in our tax system, President Biden now faces even more pressure building from fellow Democrats who are calling for major reform, including from Senator Elizabeth Warren, who proposed a wealth tax during her presidential campaign. Warren tweeted yesterday, quote, "Our tax system is rigged for billionaires who don't make their fortunes through income like working families do. The evidence is abundantly clear. It is time for a wealth tax in America to make the ultra-rich finally pay their fair share." Let's bring into our conversation Nick Confessori, New York Times political reporter and MSNBC contributor. You know, Nick, Elizabeth Warren actually speaks for a lot of Democrats and a lot of Republicans. The polling on raising taxes on the ultra-rich is almost as bipartisan as approval for President Biden's COVID relief package. I mean, it is very politically popular. Do you think a story like this helps push it back to the top of the agenda?
It has to. I mean, this is a stunning report that shows again that there are really two tax systems in this country. A tax system for those of us who earn salaries or wages by the hour, and a tax system for the ultra wealthy whose income comes really in the form of wealth in stocks and assets that are put in trusts. And so what we can see here is that in this second system, you can really escape the income tax. I was really shocked but not surprised in some way to learn that I paid more income taxes in 2018 than the richest guy in the world, who is Elon Musk.
Yeah, and I mean, this is the part of it where I think President Biden has this extraordinary, I won't call it a pattern yet, because but he has this now record of getting bipartisan support out in the country and then using it to pass legislation without any Republicans. And it would be incredibly bold to do that on a wealth tax. Do you think they will?
I'm not sure, because a wealth tax isn't really on the board right now for President Biden. Look, in some ways, this report shows how narrow the Biden taxing plan actually is. It relies really on raising corporate taxes and some taxes on wealth. What this really is about is a whole way of avoiding those taxes entirely by having this unrealized wealth, stocks you haven't sold. And some of the wealth tax proposals would tackle that and say, look, if you have all this money sitting in stocks and sitting in assets, we should find some way to tax it. And that's the only way to bring some real equality to the system. So I can see now some pressure actually on President Biden from the left to say, look, the stuff you have proposed is not enough. It's in some ways too narrow and timid. It's time to think bigger.
And I guess from my vantage point, having worked with them, I can see pressure on the right as well, that this is just something that
Absolutely.
the public has no equivocation about. Nick Confessori, thank